Members, we now turn our attention, the House's attention, the Committee of the Whole's attention to the Rugby World Cup 2011 Empowering Bill. The question, members, is that Part 1 stand apart.
Chairman.
I call the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and just to indicate to you that while there is quite a bit of questioning to go on this part of the bill, this is one of the parts of the bill that was substantially improved by the very good work in the Select Committee, and I want to compliment David Parker for his chairing of that committee. And I want to say also that as far as this part of the bill, there were useful contributions made by opposing members from the government who were on the other side, and I think that it's, except in some of the areas of interpretation, that there was a degree of unanimity on this. But, Mr. Speaker, and I do also want to, at this stage, thank the officials and Parliamentary Council who were involved in the drafting of it, and possibly apologise to them for what they're about to go through, and say to the Minister in charge of the bill, who I know is very interested in this and going to call Mr McCulley down to the House soon so that the real Minister can answer the questions. What I'm hoping for is from him an indication to officials that it's pretty unlikely that they will be required for detailed work as we go through this, because it's my understanding, I've looked on the table, I don't think there are any government amendments to the bill, and the one opposition amendment is something which is I think what I'm indicating to the Minister is that if he was a kind and generous Minister, he would say to the officials that this would be cruel and unusual punishment for them to stay here for today and tomorrow, dealing with this particular piece of legislation. I think it's fair to say, dealing with the Part 1 on a clause basis, the Clause 3, Part 1, is now drafted in a way which is much more easily understood than as it was earlier. I think describing something as a 7th quadrennial International Rugby World Championships tournament as opposed to Rugby World Cup 2011, I think the committee, in doing its work, has got the focus back onto something which is tidier legislation, easier to understand, and I think that as the people in the various parts of the Auckland Central electorate, as they study this in Ponsonby, probably late at night with the local member, they will be more easily able, it's the only time I ever see the member out is late at night. Is having Rugby World Cup 2011 means that it will be easy to understand, and I want to thank the member for her contribution in making that change. And I think the committee, unusually, because there were a lot of the clauses that were changed, going to Clause 2 of the preliminary provisions. And I just want to say, in brackets, Mr Chairman, I think it is good to have preliminary provisions describing a bill and making clear to people what is coming later. Clause 2 is one of the few clauses. Part 1, 3.2. Subclause 2, I apologise to my colleague, is one of the few subclauses in this part of the legislation where it has gone through unchanged. And it does, what it does is outline what comes later. I think probably not quite in the sort of detail that some of us would like, especially around the obnoxious Part 4 clauses, which I won't get into now, but I thought if one was going to be clear in Part 2C, subclauses 1 or 2, it would have been better to indicate, Mr. Chairman.
Call the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr. Chairman, it would have been better as part of that C1 and 2 to make it clear that the Minister, while he's subject to a recommendation of the authority, he's not really subject to it.
No, that's right.
I think in fact, now this is probably an important point to ask is under under Part 4, subclause 2, where it says empowers a minister subject to a recommendation of the authority to grant urgent approvals for activities that for good reason were not foreseen. Now, the question I've got is, in fact, is the minister subject to the authority? Subject to a recommendation of the authority? He's not. So it's a question now as to whether there is a false and misleading. In fact, it's fair to say that I'm going to apologise for the House. I sat on the Select Committee and I hadn't really focused on that particular sub-clause as we were working through. But there is a question about whether the minister is subject to the recommendation of the authority. It's probably having received a recommendation from the authority might be right, but I don't think it... Well, if it was true, the litigation would be interesting, but the buildings could be gone. It might make some interesting case law about, but my memory, and I'm not a lawyer, but I think the specific might override the general, and it could well be that the specific in Part 4 overrides the general in Part 1. And my learned colleague David Parker indicates, I think he's nodding because he's agreeing rather than going to sleep. But Mr. Chairman, I think it is probably, if it got to a court, the misleading nature of Part 1, Clause 3, 2C2, that's numeral 2, C, page 7, line 34, 35 and 36 are the lines to which I'm referring, and it's my view that they are misleading, but that a court, the legal expert from Temuka seems to indicate, the legal expert from Temuka tends to indicate that she knows better than my colleague who has been a member from down there for some time. Now the other area, D, which refers to Part 5, refers to temporary processes under which the authority may grant Rugby World Cup liquor licences. Now, and again, I'm not certain that totally covers it, because I think within that part there are restrictions around gambling arrangements are made as part of that clause, or changes to gaming licences. And again, it's a question of whether having a description which is short of the full description, what actually happens, is something that we should be worried about, or whether we should go with the flow and say for the Minister in charge of the bill, Mr McCulley, his Associate Minister, Mr Brownlee, or for the Acting Minister, Mr Thompson. What's his name? Coleman. For Mr Coleman, whether for any of, as far as they're concerned, this is pretty good, having preliminary provisions in a bill to work on that. But Mr Chairman, I think the